My goodness, we're here on the longest day of the year in Mill Street Museum, and I am so thrilled and delighted and honoured to be joined by a colleague who was being trained as a teacher from 1967 to 1969 in St. Patrick's Training College in Drumcondra, and I was just from 68 to 70, so I was a year later. But I speak of someone who has definitely had such an amazing impact on so many different areas over the years. I'm so delighted to welcome and say Ciad Míle Fáilte to Con Lynch, Cruthúr ó Lynchig. Con, this is a joy being here to welcome you here to Mill Street Museum. And already you have met the next generation here, and you've been so generous with them. You could tell you're teaching wonderful talents and ability there, the way you communicated. But welcome anyway, Con.
So, Gramila Mahagat, Sean, it's really good to be here in this place at this time, and it's good to be here with your good self, Sean. Yeah, I know that you two are doing wonderful work in the community, very useful work in promoting it, but it's just such, you're just such a treasure to the place, and I know that's what I'm told, Sean, yeah.
Well, Con, it's yourself or the real treasure, because I've heard so many wonderful stories about yourself. Con, take us back to your, where you come from, your youth, and as you made your way to becoming a teacher.
Yeah, well, I was born in a townland called Slieveryuk in Ballyvourna, and I'm very proud of that fact. I went, for the first 2 years of my life, I went across the hill to Slieveryuk school, to probably a couple of miles at least anyway. It was a wettish type of a ray hill, you know, you would really be wet in summer and winter almost. But then our dad and mum sold a little farm and sold the farm and moved to the village. So I went to what we call the village school, Ballyvourna. And
so you were you in the heart of the Gaeltacht from the very outset?
Yes, absolutely. And my mother had really good Irish. My dad was from over the bounds in Clonkeen and Clydach, and his Irish was fairly good as well. So Irish was always important to us.
Tremendous. And the one thing I must say about you, Con, is that you are very conscious of the fact that the people that mightn't have strong Irish and would feel a little bit not as confident about it, you have great understanding of those people. You will change to English, you will change to Irish as you see fit.
Sure, I think to be an elitist, I certainly wouldn't be an elitist, you know, in anything, especially in language, because language is about communication. So it's just, it's wonderful to see people making the effort. We have a new Sagat Paroshta in Ballyvourna now, and he's making great efforts to communicate through Irish, and that's having an impact as well, because often it's somebody like that who can have greater influence than somebody who's very, very fluent in Irish. So, yeah, in relation to the school in Ballyvourna, the teachers there, I loved the school. I loved all the teachers there.
Who were your teachers there?
My first teacher was a lady named Miss Casey, Joan Casey. I think she has died. She went to live in Youghal eventually. Then Mrs. McSweeney, Mary Lynch. One time she's passed away. Banny Hacon, who was a very hard-working teacher, tough, but very hard-working. And then you had Master Stina O'Hagata, who was a very relaxed man in his teaching methods, and I'd say the man who influenced me most in my teaching life. You know, despite 2 years in St. Pat's, I think it's the style of teaching that the Master O'Hagata had that influenced me, and the way he related to the children.
Amazing,
you know?
Amazing. Yeah. And of course, this was primary school, and you find that it was a happy time.
Well, I loved it. Now, naturally, I didn't like going to school. I didn't want to go to school. Who would want to go to school when you could be free? But I mean, you just give up your freedom, and that was it. And I felt the same way about second level, and I felt the same way when I was teaching myself. Sunday night I still had the same type of feeling. But it's just that you're not free. But that applies to every job. So
it does indeed.
by and large, I felt. I was happy in my school. Times were tougher, and lads were tougher, and you sometimes had to fight your way out of situations, and that was it.
Right.
Now, I was most fortunate in that Colossus gone, which up to then, to 1960, 61 had been a preparatory college. And the year I left primary school, it opened as a secondary school. Now, there was one small problem that it would cost £10 for a day student, and £10 was not so easily come by. But that year, I worked. I was working anyway from a younger age, even with farmers, for hire.
Right.
And I loved it.
Right.
I worked hard days, and
So up to then, Colossus was entirely for boarders.
It was, and entirely it was for preparatory students. There was an examination called preparatory, and I think that it was intended as a preparatory examination for those who would eventually become teachers.
Right.
So the vast majority of people from Colossus went on to Colossus Father in Drumcondra, and
we talk also of Micheál Murhertig. Was a past pupil, wasn't he?
He was, yes, and another past pupil who was there in my time was Micheál McLeeson. He was a councillor in Killarney. I rarely met him ever since, but I know that he was
a gentleman, an absolute gentleman.
Yes, and a very good man. So I know he has retired now.
And I know that Micheál Murhertig speaks with great love of his time in Balaborna.
Yeah, I'd say most people would. Now, I perhaps was there in slightly tougher times. I suppose there was pressure on to get results, but I have no complaints anyway. I'm grateful to the De La Salle brothers. Just as I was saying about earning the money, eventually they actually educated me free, and in a sense that was that is what they were set up to do. But I was very grateful to them, and if I got a few slaps here and there, I have no problem about that.
That's right.
There were times when I deserved them and didn't get them. So
you're very understanding guy.
That's the way of the time, that was it.
In fact, there are parallels here in Mill Street, because we had Colossus Padraig here in Mill Street, which was run by a family called the Hickey family, Garrett Hickey and Rita Hickey, and Joe Garvey, of course, and a wonderfully dedicated staff. But had that not been here, we possibly would not have had the opportunity for post-primary education.
Yeah, I think that point is lost on many of the modern-day commentators. In fact, I think it's totally obliterated from the consciousness of the people at present time, that so many of us would never have had education without the brothers and the nuns and the priests and the rest of it, who gave their time freely and for nothing. For example, I had a couple of uncles in the De La Salle brothers. They were teachers. Now, when they got their check, they just signed the back of it. It all went into the order and to support the school and help provide education for those who couldn't afford it. Besides, as well, the nuns, all the various orders of nun, Presentation, Mercy, etc. They provided that. They did the very same thing. And, where would we be without them? They left an enormous...
We cannot forget this.
Well, unfortunately, it is forgotten, Sean, and that was actually to counter that, in a sense, that I wrote the book about lives of service, priests, brothers and nuns in Balaborna, of which there were 86.
Right.
And I am under pressure to...
I'm looking here at that amazing book here, right over here, and Lives of Service. Even the cover I just love.
Yes, it's
and Religious Sisters, Brothers and Priests of Balaborna by Cornelius Lynch. Very impressive altogether. Oh my goodness. And this was in tribute to those. How many people did you say?
86 in the parish, yeah, and
In just a small parish.
correct, yeah, that would be more or less within living memory, or those who could be remembered. There would have been others, of course, prior to that as well.
Yeah.
And but having said that, like, there are some heroic people in there. There were some amazingly intelligent people in that book, described in that book. One of the most amazing stories was that of Sister Eileen Healy from Coolay. Sister Eileen began work as a nurse in the mental hospital in Cork. And then, for some reason, she was actually nursing two patients who were OLA sisters. They were Old Ladies of Apostle Sisters. She went on to join the nuns in that order. They asked her if she would train to be a surgeon, which she did. They needed surgeons in Nigeria, and there she was sent off to Nigeria. She was in charge in a hospital there. She was the only surgeon for maybe 100 miles around.
Wow.
And things were reasonably primitive, and she wouldn't always have blood supply available for operations which were needed, especially maybe urgent ones. And she told me herself that many times she went downstairs, drew off a sample of her own blood, matched it on a slide, and she said the strange thing about it, that it almost always matched the blood of the patient. Then she drew off a pint of blood, went up, rigged it up, and did the surgery. So now I think that would
Heroic.
yes, it is heroic. It would touch the hearts of anybody,
Absolutely.
But
In listening to you here now, Con, I'm amazed at the phenomenal research that you must have done to discover so many people in the Ballyvourna area who have given such amazing lives of service.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, I started off with the idea of doing a book on missionaries from Macroom, which I am currently working on now, all right. But I didn't get very many names from Macroom at that time. But names began to come from Ballyvourna, and then other people, particularly there was a woman there, a girl there named Mary Scannell, and Mary dug up a lot of names for me, and I had about 40 of my own, and eventually ended up at 86.
Wow.
So different people, and not only Mary but others as well, went to the trouble of helping. Some went around to graveyards taking pictures of tombstones where people were buried. So that was, you couldn't but be encouraged by that. So,
but in fact, Con, anyone who is mentioned on it, it is a sign of such a tribute to get mentioned in it. And I'm sure that any family that have since discovered someone else will be feeling, my goodness, if only I had known to be included with those amazing 80 plus people.
Yeah, that actually did happen. I met somebody there recently in Macroom from Ballyvourna, and he said, the book, he said, my father's sister was a nun, but we didn't think that that you were going writing such a book, that there would be, how shall I say, shy people like myself, and I could understand that. So I promised them I'll give her a mention in the next book in another parish, but I can refer back to it.
Tremendous. Yeah. And it's a bit like when we compiled the book called Picture Mill Street, which is, we expected we'd have about 300 photographs in it. It turned out that we had 970 photographs in the end. But again, we met people after the publication of the book that said, oh my goodness, if only we had known, we'd have some gems to share.
Yeah, and that's always a problem. And in fact, I suppose with books like that, or the book like Government as well, my most recent one, it's hard maybe sometimes to say, look, this is it, I just have to stop here.
Exactly.
And so publishers' deadlines or printers' deadlines actually help in that regard, because you reach a point and say, look, just I would include it, but just the time isn't there.
And usually if it's approaching Christmas, because usually the best market would be before Christmas, of course. But as we go back further again now, you had to do the primary cert, of course, before you got into post-primary.
Yeah, I did the primary cert in Scoil Ballyvourna. Then,
and were there scholarship exams?
There were scholarship exams, I didn't get one. as I said, maybe I went close to it, I don't know, but I didn't get it anyway. I don't
They
think
were limited at that time, very limited.
none of the people in my class did, or the year ahead of me either, I'd say.
And like if you didn't get it with your wonderful command of Irish, very few others would have a chance.
Yeah, I suppose I just whatever line of questions there were, that was it anyway, and that's it. So as I said, then I felt really privileged to go to Class Con. We weren't there only about a week when we were given a little exam anyway, and a number of us were moved up into second year. So that
second year already?
Yeah, well, we never did first year, but that's not so much a tribute to us. It's just the fact that the numbers were very large in first year and not so big in second year. So,
right. So the best people could go progress faster.
Well, yes. Now, to put it in modern terms, it was challenging, particularly geometry.
Yeah, I'd imagine, because you were moving up, it's like maybe taking a step too far on the stairs.
Yes, well, that we hadn't put our foot on the first step,
Exactly.
and so, but anyway, we coped fine, and we did the intercert as it was at the time. Now, then there was a situation, we were too young to go on, so we had to do the intercert again, so.
Oh, but you did twice?
Yeah, at the time, it was, there were 6 subjects at the time. Life was simple enough, at that time, so there were 6 subjects, and I got 60 was honours, I got 5 honours, and 57 in science, so it was
well done.
So then the following year I made up that 3 marks anyway. I got the 6 honours.
Oh, well done, full honours. And then you were on your way then to the leaving, the 5th year and the leaving?
That's right, yeah, that's right. Yeah, if it's appropriate to mention, one of the lads with me was Dennis O'Riordan from Saudi Willing.
Great friend of mine, who wrote actually the foreword in our book, Picture Mill Street.
Yes,
Indeed.
yeah, a good fellow, Denny. Now, onto the leaving cert then, of course, and thereafter, I had an idea in my mind for many years that I would like to be a priest, and a missionary priest in particular.
You would have made an amazing priest.
Yeah, I'm afraid not, Sean, but anyway, thank you for saying it. But the reason was simple enough. In those days, and you would remember this, Sean, I suppose, and many other people of our age, that's over 50, Sean,
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So
72 here.
Right. And that we got to understand that people who were not baptized could not get into heaven. And I felt a personal kind of an obligation that I should do as much as I could to baptize people in Africa or South America, Argentina and places like that, in order to give them an opportunity to get into heaven. And that was the key motivation, that was the cornerstone of what I believed was my vocation. So I headed off to the Divine Word Missionaries in Dunaman in Roscommon.
That produced that wonderful magazine called The Word.
Exactly, and it was a wonderful magazine, yeah. I actually, every month, we would have 3 or 4 mornings a week wrapping it, and I spent quite a few mornings.
They were wonderful. And they produced a beautiful calendar every year also.
That's correct, yeah, that's correct. But anyway, during that time, the Second Vatican Council had been on for quite a few years. It was on from about 1961 to 65, I think, but it's about 66, 67, the documents were becoming available, and they would have arrived in the seminary in fairly draft form anyway, before they would be available to the general public. And there was a meeting one day, we were called to a meeting, and I was actually a bit late coming in, I think. I used to play the accordion, I was playing a few tunes somewhere for myself, out of earshot of everyone else, of course. And
and you still play?
Very little, Sean.
Yeah,
but
right.
so some of the lads were up at the top table, let's say maybe one of the priests and some of the senior students, and the thing that hit me like a thunderbolt was a statement that approximates the following. In the past now, it was believed that people couldn't go to heaven unless they were baptized. Well, now that teaching has changed. And the teaching now is that, in fact, if anybody who lives a good life, of course, can go to heaven even if they weren't baptized. That would be in areas, of course, where it wouldn't be available. And I remember asking the question, and what about people who never even heard of God? And it was affirmed that anybody who never even heard of God, provided they had lived a good life, could, of course, go to heaven the same chance as the rest of us. And that took the cornerstone from my vocation, you know. And while I didn't leave straight away, might have been maybe about 3 months later, I felt then, like, you know, the reason...
Your calling was elsewhere.
Yes, that I just... and that did take the wind out of my sails, as I said, or just was the basis of why I was there. And so I just thought, struck me one night, you know, this is not where I should be.
Right. And that took courage because it was a time that if people left a seminary like that, that took courage.
Yes, I think I would agree with you there. I found it very difficult at a personal level now.
Because you were wondering, maybe, how it might be viewed in your family, in the locality?
I'd say it wasn't that so much, to be honest. My family were
very supportive,
very understanding anyway. Like in those days, you were brought up in those days, like, to deal with whatever circumstances confronted you. Right. And you were expected to be able to do that from a young age. And while supports were there if you needed them, it was understood, and there was no need for anybody to say it, you know. Yeah. There was no need to say, we are here for you, because we just knew that.
Yeah. And that's what gave you the courage, because someone with less grounding and established soundness from the start might not have the same level of courage.
Possibly, but like everybody has to confront challenges in their lives, and of a greater or lesser degree. And if I would have any criticism, I suppose, of modern times, is that maybe children aren't allowed to experience disappointments, maybe of a smaller scale, as building blocks for building up their ability to cope with bigger problems. But no, I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying that. And
it's being very practical, because, and thank you for sharing this, Con, in a wonderful manner. But so the decision was then taken. You were leaving the Divine Word Missionaries, and you were going to have another career in life.
Yeah, that's right. I had put down teaching as my second option, and I had done the interview, being granted a place, and that was held over for a year. And that would be a normal procedure at that time. Even some of the students in your time too would have been in that category. There were a few of them. I won't mention names.
I didn't realise they would hold it over for a year.
Yeah, they would. I say the universities would do the same thing, because in those days it was easy to get university scholarships. So I got a couple, and they all wrote to me in a year's time again, asking me if I wanted to take up the place. So it's a good idea, because look,
great.
At 17, I was 17 that time when I went, and look, you think you know, but you don't, you know. And at 70, Sean, you think you know, but you don't.
So true. And of course, like when I went to training college here for Mill Street, it was such a different world. We were entering the capital. We were entering a new world, but a very special world, where the friends we met, I think, in the next 2 years were lifelong friends in many ways.
Yeah, well, St. Patrick's in Drumcondra was truly, there was a modern outlook there, you know, and it was a time of change as well. It's hard for people to visualize it, but it was the most beautiful campus. There were, I think it's 5 houses, but they were not like a normal house. There were 4 stories, and there was 2 blocks in each house with a common room, beautiful common room attached to each, and they were around in oval shaped, I suppose, with a lovely area in the centre. You had huge big trees outside in the lawn. The traffic was a little bit distant, but it was just beautiful location.
And it's only now, 53-4 years later, that they're considering renovating the very building you're mentioning, because it is quite unchanged in many ways, even as it is at the moment. Now, security might have changed somewhat, but and I know it's now known as the DCU campus, St. Patrick's campus there. But which of the houses were you in yourself?
I was in Bangor.
And I was in Lismore.
Yes. So one of the people that I was a prefect. I don't know if I was elected prefect, but I was anyway. It was actually.
They obviously recognised the quality of the person.
They saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, but anyway, that was it. And I was taken by surprise, actually, by it. But the prefects then, the following year, would go back a day earlier, a day or two earlier, to meet the first years, the new first years, one of whom would have been your good self. Yeah. So I made a point of bringing the suitcase of every student from Bangor was my house to their room, and one of those students did very well afterwards and achieved great things, namely Andy Kenny, and I know he was a good friend of yours as well. Friend. So,
and Enda was with us for the 52nd reunion recently and gave an amazing speech.
Yeah, he was a good fellow, you know. He had a very friendly way about him. Another man who became a TD, of course, in that year was Bill Fitzgerald, Liam Fitzgerald,
and Micheál Kitt.
And Micheál Kitt, yeah. So the previous year, then, of course, to us, you had Joe O'Toole and John Carr and Donald Lynch and all those fellas. They took up all the good jobs in the NTO, so there was nothing left for us. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And apparently, when they meet, they meet on a very regular basis that particular year.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And talking of meetings, Sean, when we met for the 25th anniversary, we had other lads from not too far from here as well, John Kelleher from Gneogilla and Joe Hickey from around that area as well. But anyway, to Tony Shine, of course, from Domtariff,
who was a past pupil of the alma mater here in Mill Street of Coláiste Pádraig, and I meet Tony fairly regularly also. And Tony, absolutely, and it's quite astounding when the 25th anniversary was very special because not one person had passed to their eternal reward on our 25th. Now, it was very different on our 52nd reunion, but not one person had actually passed.
Yeah, in our case, I think there was 6 or 8 who had died, sadly. But during that, I'm one of the people I met, I think, was a lad named Paul O'Reilly, I think who was in your house, and or he was Clan McNice, I'm not sure which, but
I say Clan McNice.
Paul told me about a Camino that he used to cycle in. He used to go there every year. Yes. And I asked him, like, what is a Camino? And he explained to me that it's a journey following in the footsteps of St. James, is it, or Santiago. Straight away a thought entered my mind. I said, St. Gobnet, who was the patron saint of my native parish, Ballabona, she travelled a lot, and maybe we could have a Camino of Goblet. Now, that, Sean, is 30 years ago, I suppose, but the thought stayed in my mind. It went a bit dormant, and other areas in the country began to have Caminos, and but then about 2 years ago, well, probably a bit longer than that, I began thinking about it again. But 2.5 years ago or more, I began seriously trying to trace and map out Gobnet's journey. Beginning in Inisheer, I visited every place, and wherever I could get a B&B, I stayed there for a night as well, because it's good to visit where Gobnet was in the twilight,
Absolutely.
And the early morning.
Yeah.
So starting in Inisheer, then she probably came from, while in Inisheer, she had a vision or a dream, or an angel appeared to her, whichever it was, but anyway, she received the message that it was not the place of her resurrection, that the place of her resurrection was where she would see 9 white deer, and that she was to leave Inisheer and go in search of 9 white deer, which she did. probably went by sea to Dunqueen, probably landed in Fiontraw, Ventry, spent a few years there probably because she still remembered and venerated there, and well venerated there, you know. Then probably set off again. And the next place that we know of her for sure is a place called Kilgobnet near Beaufort and Kerry.
Right, and there's also Kilgobnet down near Dungarvan.
That's right, and I'll come to that eventually because there's also a well named for her in Cahersiveen. So there is a slim possibility that she would have gone there. So I have that as an optional loop in the Camino that I have mapped out. But having left, there's just the remains of her church in Kilgobnet and part of a list that used to be there. Her well used to be there, but it's no longer visible. And of course, Kilgobnet School is named after her, where our former colleague Pat O'Connor from Beaufort taught there. You know, his daughter is teaching there now. She's a private there. But
and Pat O'Connor, of course, his son always plays the wonderful music for the Roses of Tralee on stage. It is his son, because they're a gifted musical family also.
I wasn't aware he was playing at that level, but I knew that they were very good musicians, So heading off then, the next decision I had to make was, where did Gobnet go? Because we know for sure she was in Ballyagran in Limerick. And how did she go there? So there is evidence, or a tradition anyway, that she stayed for a while around Castle Island. So I headed for Castle Island then that day and stopped there, eventually then reached Ballyagran in County Limerick, where I eventually located where her well was, and met the landowner, who was a very kind and helpful man. I met him a few more times as well, and got some very good authentic information as well from another source. So I'm convinced that would definitely be a stop in the Camino. Further on then, towards the Tipperary border, there's a well in a place called Boher Carron, which is dedicated to Gobnet, and a few more saints, but it appears that she was there for some time anyway. So I concluded from that and the route that she would have gone along the Glenavahar Low and down through Tourneen and Walford to the Kilgobnet, which you just mentioned. You see, now Kilgobnet is the name of a parish comprising of Kilbrine, Culligan and Kilgobnet, and the parish team is Kilgobnet, the football pitch is Kilgobnet, the sports centre Kilgobnet, the handball club when it was there was Kilgobnet, and they're quite interested and enthusiastic down there about.
And my own first cousins, John and Tommy Radley, are quite close to Kilgobnet, and I've been at Mass in that very beautiful church.
Yes, and will they be going to Mass in that place?
They quite often, possibly into Dungarvan other times, but Kilgobnet, I think, would be their main church.
Yeah, the former parish priest asked me to go down there to go to Mass, because I had been down there a few times previously, and it was a lovely experience.
And not only that, but right outside the church was a pub, and there was a lovely family living there. I think that pub is now shut, but that was a point of interest also after Mass for many people, because it was just close to the beautiful church.
Yes, that would be, I suppose, reflect practice and after Mass tradition in many places as well. But
exactly, and of course we mustn't forget, and I'm sure a lot of what we have just spoken about there about St. Goblet is within the book itself.
It is, yes.
Tremendous altogether. We'll come to that in one moment. But of course, St. Goblet is very much Whitsun, the famous Whitsun.
Yes.
I know that people from the Mill Street area and far beyond used to always go to Ballyvourna for the Whitsun.
Yeah, absolutely. I've no doubt, but the Whit Sunday in Ballyvourney was the second celebratory feast day for Gobnet, the first being the 11th of February. But on Whit Sunday, people came from far and near, as you say, Sean. And of course, you saw people all over Mill Street and North Cork, Drumtariff, all those places. they had Ballybona connection, so anyone connected remotely to Ballybona, they came on Whitsunday. Now, it wasn't that they were doing anything exciting, you know. Naturally, there was roulette there and swing boats.
Yes, there was a carnival atmosphere.
Yes, when it wasn't anywhere else. Yes.
And not only that, in the early days, in fact, there's film footage of this in the 1930s, of the Mill Street Rovers playing for an open-air dance around the Whitsun. And the Mill Street Rovers were comprised of a person called Jerry Kavanagh, Bill Bryan, and Dennis O'Keefe, all of whom have passed now. But my own father played the drums in it. And there's footage that featured in the series called Come West Along the Road, and they were the opening sequence every week. You saw this, it's often used.
I could whistle the tune for you, but in case I wouldn't get it right. That's interesting. Now, I know there was a platform there in more modern times. I mean, by that the 60s, late 50s, early 60s,
and where might the platform have been in relation to, let's say, where the grotto and well is now?
Now, the platform I'm speaking of is it would be pretty much across the road from O'Connell's pub, O'Connell's bar at the east end of the village. It was down on the southern side of the road. So, well, then you would go a good mile from there before you turn off to the left to go up to where St. Gobnet's shrine is.
Right. I often wondered where the actual, because they seem to be having a mighty time all together. But bringing us back then to your time in training college was a very happy time, Con.
Yeah, it was a happy time. I think my period of time in Dunaman was a help. As I said, St. Pat's had moved from a time of fairly rigid discipline to, I think, maybe a little bit in the other extreme, like where we could come and go whenever we wished. And
there was great flexibility in comparison to Carysfort for the girls at the other side of the city.
And that's right. I think, I imagine, and I know for a fact that the thinking of the authorities in St. Pat's was, look, if they can't manage their freedom in the training college, how will they manage their freedom when they leave? And but having said that, you were expected to do your stuff at the same time.
What I noticed there when we went to training college, Con, was the range of people we got to meet that we would never have met from other counties. We'd normally have met people from our neighbouring counties, but the range, and of course the difference in the Con Lynch, the Irish of Connemara, the Northern Irish, and of course the Munster Irish.
Yes, I'm smiling at that, Sean, because one of our lecturers, Scailge, I think he might have been doing a PhD or something at the time in Fóriacht, that would be pronunciations and accents, I suppose, and he would frequently, because Sean McElwee was a very good Irishan, you know, and from Donegal Gaeltacht, and I would have been the other Gaeltacht person there from the southern side, so he would frequently ask, Connus the dear Fosse, Shininishi Sean, and so Sean would say it for him, and then he would say, Connus the dear Fosse, Crehor, you know, and so...
Fascinating. And it was even difficult for us there was one lecturer from the north of Ireland now that... because they had such a strong northern Con Lynch, it was difficult enough to, like the word for book, lour, and next thing you'd hear lure.
Yes, well, of course, you had all the other variations as well, like Kerkuya Wilto and Conachur, and the Conant, of course, in the pronunciation was different, just as it is in Biella, in English as well. But that too added to the richness of the place, I think.
Absolutely. And what, if you wondered, what is the standard Irish? Is it the Connemara Irish?
I don't think so. I think it's a kind of a creation which there's a lot to be said for it, I suppose. But the trouble with the Caidan and the standard Irish is that the ceol, the music of the language, is lost in it. For example, in the book there, Gobnet, because so much of government was in different Gaeltacht. The stuff I got, saying in Inishir, I didn't speak a word of English to the people I was speaking to in Inishir. I didn't speak a word of English to the people in Doncreen, in Irish, and in Ballybourne, and Cooley. When I visited the school there, that's all a scale. So the stuff I got from them, I translated it into English, all right, and that's in the main body of the book, but I put a separate section out of respect to them, and also respect to the Gaeilge, in the Irish section of the book. But the point I'm coming to is it relates to your question. I had to do it in the Caidan, but I grew up with an Irish, the Darius agus Darius Armani agus Coast and Stay agus Chris Mavroga agus Malena or agus Dehas Morgan Faster.
I love to hear you have such a richness of tone there.